Welcome to Spotlights. This is the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. And each week we feature somebody working in or around the intersection of religion and ecology. And this week I'm really happy to welcome onto the show, Andreas Karelas. Andreas, welcome.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate being here.
I have a book here, Climate Courage. This is really a remarkable book. I found it recently. The full title, Climate Courage, How Tackling Climate Change Can Build Community, Transform the Economy, and Bridge the Political Divide in America. That's a tall order. And then reading the book, I got a crazy sense of optimism from it. Instead of this very skeptical initially, I'm like, this title, I don't know, can anything really do all of this? And then the tone, the positivity, a sense of possibility without being like naively optimistic at all. So I really like the tone of the book, and that you got Catherine Hayhoe to write the foreword. She's another person who really speaks with that kind of like, hey, we can do this. Don't let the challenges bring you down. There's a lot more possibility and opportunity than we think. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the overall message of the book. What are you trying to convey with this whole project?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. What I'm really trying to convey is that, look, I mean, if we, take a look at the data, we realize that climate change is a very, very serious situation. It's very scary, and we don't have a lot of time to act to get it right. As Bill McKibben points out, it's a time test, right? Like we don't have forever. The window is closing upon the time that we can act. And so we have to think strategically around how do we message about the issue? How do we mobilize people? How do we motivate people? How do we inspire people to take action quickly? Because what I've seen in the climate movement for many years is a lot of doom and gloom, a lot of scary messages, not overly scary because the data is that scary, right? Like it is a crisis, right? And I don't mean to downplay that at all. But when we look at the crisis and we look at the psychology, the research around how do human beings relate to something that's scary like this, we tend to narrow our focus and we tend to turn away from it, right? We can't really sit with a negative emotion for too long before we want to pivot. And so when we ask ourselves the question, how can we mobilize society to move as quickly as possible? What the research points to is that we have to be solutions oriented and we have to be focused on the positive momentum that we already have. If people think that we have momentum already going for us in our direction towards solutions, then we're much more likely to get involved, to put our back into it and say, yeah, we got this, we can do it. Whereas if all we see is the negative data, the storms are getting bigger, the ice caps are melting faster, it's worse and worse, then we tend to shut down, right? And we can't act. And so that's really, I think, the point of the book. I want to move away. And I think the other interesting thing is that, and I wrote this before the pandemic, but given the pandemic and given the state of society, especially in America, we are so ripe for change. We are so ripe for transformation in so many ways, right? And to make a more a way of life that's more fulfilling, that's more just, that has more opportunity, that's more uplifting, that's more cohesive. And so, what better way to transform all of the sort of systems in the economy, and what more mobilizing opportunity than solving the climate crisis? So we have this opportunity to change everything, and we have to focus on the opportunity in front of us and the positive impacts that we can have, rather than, oh, we need to avoid X, Y, Z, and sort of the demoralizing sense that comes with that.
That's great. And I see that really reflected in the title, that you talk about courage. So much discussion of climate ethics. There's a lot of hope talk. And that, hope has its place. Not trying to be mad about hope, but there's something about hope that's not really action oriented, right? Where courage is, the virtue for acting in the face of fear, kind of
Yes.
meeting fear with some fearless resolve.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering how courage as this kind of, mobilizing force figures into what you're writing about.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I quote Kate Marvel in the book, who's a NASA scientist, and she says, we need courage, not hope, to fight climate change. And I actually came up with the title when I was reading a number of years ago, reading Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly,
Hmm.
and she talks so much about courage. Um, and this sense of vulnerability and the importance of leaning into that and saying, yes, we are vulnerable, but we have to find our courage in order to persevere. And I think that's really, to me, what's needed in the climate movement, and hope. Um, and again, obviously we all think generally positively about the word hope and the feelings that evolve, and we do need hope. We do need a hopeful sort of, looking forward in order to kind of keep going. But hope in a certain way can be passive, right?
Mhm.
Oh, well, I hope, the president takes care of this. I hope, the United Nations takes care of this. Whereas courage is to say, no, I am going to play a role. I am not going to wait for anybody else. I am going to do what I can in my community with my peers, and we're going to make something happen. And I think that's an important shift that we need to make collectively.
Yeah, and it comes across on every page. There's just that sense of like, okay, let's do this, and just really good energy. Instead of just listing all the facts that say how difficult this is going to be, you're saying, yeah, but look at what we're already accomplishing. Look how many opportunities there are to build on that progress. And then,
Absolutely.
of course, when people think about things like hope and courage and like our sources for moral guidance, a moral compass in these times, one of the things that they're going to look at is religion. And of course, a
Mhm.
lot of people, when they think about religion and climate change, are like, oh no, don't bring religion into this. Isn't that a source of climate denial for some people? Or religion so otherworldly that people don't care about the earth? But in what you're looking at, you found a really positive role for religion for this climate courage.
Absolutely. And it's been a really bright spot in the climate movement for me, seeing all the incredible work that's been done by faith communities. Um, we, and actually Catherine Hayhoe's research, really helped me kind of see what was happening here, is that actually uh, there are certain folks in that will use their religion as a way of really aligning with their political views and saying, so for example, one of the things that Catherine points out that I mentioned in the book is that if you look at a list of the religions in America and where they rank in terms of their belief on climate change, um, Catholics of Hispanic descent are the number one most concerned. And that makes sense because the Pope came out with the encyclical on climate change, which I write about in the book, his encyclical on climate change and injustice. And that makes sense. Here's the Pope. This is a big issue. It's, there's an encyclical about it. We've got to take this seriously. And you go through all the religions, and all the way on the bottom are Catholics or white Catholics. Same religion, same good book, same pope, right? One no, first and last, right? And so at that point you realize that there is a lot of politics involved in religion. There is a lot of people sort of maybe dismissing or interpreting their faith in a certain way based on their political views. And so, but when you look at religions, you see across the board that there is almost in all the wisdom traditions, there is some connection to the earth. There's some connection to having harmony with nature. There is some connection of stewardship, right? This sense of we have to sort of take care of the garden. And you're actually, and one of the things I point to in the book is that there are a number of really interesting movements happening. So I talk about interfaith power and light, and their ability. They've brought together, tens of thousands of congregations around the country of all different faiths to take action on climate change. You have Green the Church, which is working with African-American churches around the country. You have Green Muslims, which is in Wisconsin, working with Islamic faith groups. And so, you really, and also you also see evangelical groups, right? You have a number of evangelical groups that have taken a strong stance on climate change. And I think we should all be supporting that and embracing that and saying, yes, this is a moral question, and we are at a time where we need faith communities to step up. The same way, during the civil rights movement, right? Martin Luther King, obviously, letter from a Birmingham jail was speaking to people of clergy and saying, I need people of faith to step up and recognize the urgency of the moment. And I think that we're seeing that happening in the climate movement, and we need more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the analogy with the civil rights movement is a really strong one. And then, part of the issue is that there's kind of like another force in religion that isn't being paid attention to that much. And it's the way in which people have a kind of religious or spiritual connection to like consumerism or capitalism. And people forget, like, if we want to complain about the religions that are really holding us back, it might be that people have something like a religious level of devotion to overconsumption, right? In the way that like Black Friday is like a national holiday, right? And so I really appreciate that you bring up the kind of psycho-spiritual dynamics of that in the book as well. So what did you kind of find looking at the, not just the economic side of consumption and capitalism, but this kind of psychological and spiritual side as well?
Yeah, this is a topic that, in my opinion, is really at the crux of the climate crisis. I open up a chapter with a quote from Gus Speth, former dean at the Yale School of Forestry, and he basically says, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically says, if people were really happy in the current sort of consumptive world that we have, then it would be hard to make a change. It would be hard to change the way things are. But if what we have is a spiritual hunger in the age of plenty, right, then you actually have a real opportunity for change. And I think that's so poignant. I think that we as a society are unhappy. We're unhappy. And there are plenty of signs you can look at, across the board. We have, in fact, the unhappiness levels are so high that we now have an entire field of study called diseases of despair, right? So you have depression, suicide, addiction, right? Use of antidepressants. All these things are and of course it's tied to the highest rates of income inequality in over 100 years, right? So and of course the political divide is also a representation of that, right? We're more divided now than ever. All of these things are tied in some ways, not exclusively, but in some ways to our isolation, our increasing consumption of media, and sort of being kind of stuck inside our own worlds, kind of stuck in front of a screen, which of course is even more so now that we're all at home during the pandemic. And so what we're lacking are the things that give us more, what the psychology shows is that what actually makes us happy is connection to other people, community, loving relationships, feeling that we have a purpose, feeling that we're giving back, and sort of being of service, and less so much concerned about myself and my things and my money. And so I think we need a real shift. Again, Martin Luther King, we need to shift from we need to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. And so that to me is profound, because when it comes to climate, if we think about what's causing climate change, it's humanity using up the resources that we have on this planet at an accelerating rate and producing this, sort of catastrophe in its wake. And that drive for consuming more is really a spiritual hunger that we're trying to fill, right? But it can never be filled with the material consumerism. It can never be filled. And so we could have all the planet's, a sort of infinity, right? That we're consuming the resources of, and we'll never feel happy. And so we actually need to shift sort of our perspectives. And so what I kind of bucket it in a chapter called simplicity, a sort of gratitude, simplicity, and service. Because I think these are and I tie a number of ideas into that, but I think if we as Americans, we in the Western world, can focus more on being grateful for the incredible quality of life that we have, and we simplify our life, focusing more of our attention on our relationships, on experiences, on self-care, and our spiritual practice, or our mindful practice, or prayer, whatever that might be, our creative pursuits, and then choosing to give back, right? Be of service to others. That the psychological research shows these are the things that are going to make us happier, right? These are the things that are going to make us feel more fulfilled, and thus, sort of damper our need for ever more consumption.
Yeah, simplicity is so underrated. And it's like, but the opposite of a simple life would be a complicated life. Why would anybody be like, you know what I want? Just a more complicated life. Like, well, of course not. And then we just feel ourselves pushed and pulled around toward that. And to just remind people, studies suggest simplicity might make you happy, and giving makes people happy. Service, right?
Yes.
One of the things that really excited me about this book, especially because I was looking for a text to use for a climate ethics class that includes a lot of community engagement. And I also want some religious perspectives. I want to talk about virtues like simplicity and courage,
Yeah.
and saw you pulling all of that together here. So really just a pleasure to read, especially because I think I read too much other stuff on climate change, and it is often just the doom and gloom, and people just trying to one up each other about how desperate the situation can appear.
Yeah.
But one of the other things I'm always curious about talking with people who are engaging in a topic that's this serious and just of this magnitude
Yeah.
is, how did you get into it? Like, what happened in your life where you thought, you know what, I'm going to try and tackle kind of the biggest problem of our day? How did you start on that path?
That's a really good question. It kind of depends how far back you want to go. When I was a kid, my mom was an avid environmentalist. Was sort of a member of all the environmental groups, and kind of instilled that in us in a young age. People around my age might remember a delightful cartoon that came out when we were kids called Fern Gully, which was I think I was about 8 when the movie came out, and it was a real strong call to action, and it really planted in my mind this seed of, we need to protect the environment. But really, kind of fast forward, when I went to college, I started school in 2001. And first week of school, first of all, it was 9/11, which completely transformed my world and my view of the world, and brought my awareness to this kind of larger global sort of political context that I hadn't really been aware of as much. And during that first week of school, and we were thinking about all these big things. I had an economics professor who said the 2 largest problems facing the world are the global wealth inequality and global climate change. And it just hit me very sort of squarely, and I kind of took it to heart. And having been already sort of interested in the environment, and I started to read more about it. And actually, I read a book by an environmentalist who I admire very much, named Lester Brown, and he wrote a book called Eco-Economy. And in that, he very much pointed out, here's the problem, and here's how unsustainable things are, but here are the solutions. Here's renewable energy technology. Here's how we can move towards a more sustainable economy. And as an economics student, I was really excited about that. And so I started focusing all my economics research on mostly clean energy. My family's of Greek descent. And so I studied abroad in Athens for a semester in college. And what I noticed in Athens is that every house, every apartment building has solar hot water heaters on the roof. Everyone, like it's almost like it'd be odd to see one without it. And it just totally hit me. I was like, I've never seen this in the States. This is such a brilliant technology. Why don't we have more solar in the United States? And that really just got me on a question that, has driven my career ever since.
And then part of that is you're also the director of REvolv. So I'd love to hear a little bit about this because it's just one of the really inspiring activities you do. It fits really well with the book because you get this sense of like, well, it's a nice book, but what are you doing to actually make this vision happen? You're like, oh, I'm doing stuff.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's a funny story. Um, I had gone to see a film with a friend that came out. I think it was like 2009. It was called The Age of Stupid, and it was a climate documentary, and it was really quite impactful. And at the end, like so many climate documentaries, it says, here's this really really scary thing that's happening, and here's a list of things you can do. Use a reusable bag and drive less, and ride your bike more. And I said, are you kidding me? Right? Like, we're all terrified by what we just watched. And so I felt this feeling, and this was also at the time when President Obama had ran on and said that he was going to, address climate change. And we saw that the cap and trade bill that passed Congress was killed in the Senate in 2009. And then the Copenhagen Accords basically fell flat, in that time. And so I felt that there was this large grassroots movement of climate change activists sort of coming to life, and that we needed a more tangible and direct way of taking action that would result in impact. And so I started to think about what that would look like, and I came up with the idea for REvolv, which is basically an opportunity for people, volunteers, and anybody listening can volunteer as a solar ambassador, where we basically train folks to with the tools to go into their community and identify local nonprofits and talk to them and help guide them through the process of going solar. And then REvolv, through our innovative revolving fund finance model, what we call the Solar Seed Fund, we finance the solar energy projects for these nonprofits. And then each time these nonprofits go solar, whether it's a church or a homeless shelter or a food bank or a school, not only are they saving money so that they can do more of the good work that they're already doing, right? Like they can put more into their mission, but we also get to tell a story. We get to point out, here is the homeless shelter that's gone solar, and now they're giving back to the community. And who can we touch with that story? Who can we get excited about clean energy through that? And so, we're happy to have deployed solar projects in 13 states. We've served communities that benefit thousands of people. And the idea is that, solar is actually contagious, right? This is one of the things I talk about in the book. When someone sees solar on their neighbor's roof, they're more likely to go solar. And if they go solar, their neighbor is even more likely to go solar. And this has been demonstrated across the country. So at the community level, we actually have a lot more impact than we realize. And that's, the idea behind REvolv, and really the main message in the book is that while we've often been told the only ways to solve the climate crisis are either at the individual level by reducing our own footprint, or trying to lobby for action at the policy level, which may be out of reach. Both are important, don't get me wrong, but the way that we can feel the most empowered is by acting with our neighbors in our communities, the community level. What are projects that we can take on that can have a direct impact in our community, and that and importantly, that we can work with other people on doing, right? Because we need to know that we're not alone. And those are some of the tools that as a REvolv solar ambassador, folks can take on projects. And then also in the book, on the website climatecourage.us, we've created these climate courage circles, where people who read the book and are inspired can start a circle, and you can start talking with your neighbors about what can we do in our community to make a difference.
That's great. Yeah. And I got to really recommend to anybody checking this out to look at Climate Courage, look at REvolv, because these are great ways to get involved. And you're absolutely right. There's something very disempowering about just always emphasizing we need systemic change or just change as an individual. Like, well, I can do that, but it's not really scaling up to anything serious. Like, well,
Right,
there's
right.
this really nice middle ground that people aren't talking about enough,
That's
community,
right.
right?
And the truth is, like, we do need systemic change, right? And it's but a question of it's a strategy question. How do we get systemic change? Well, if you look at the community level, and this is what the whole book is about, right? It's one story after another of community members that came together, that took action, that made a change, and that those changes are actually scalable. Because when you,
Yeah.
for example, one of the stories I talk about is the Sierra Club has a campaign called Ready for 100, and they have trained volunteers around the country to go into their community and convince the local elected officials in their city, county, state to commit to 100% renewable energy. And they've been so successful in the last 2 to 3 years that now 1/3 of Americans live in a place that is at some point committed to 100% renewable energy. 1/3 of Americans, right? You didn't need federal policy to get there. You just needed community volunteers taking that action. And so when you have enough community momentum going, and you see the success stories, those will spread because the next community will want to do it, and the next community. And when you have enough communities doing it, enough cities and enough states, well, then federal legislation is, the next result, right? That'll come as a result of a ground up movement.
Yeah, right. And the individual change will happen while you're engaging with your community. So yeah, it's
That's right.
this, instead of worrying about is it bottom up, is it top down, we're like, well, what about middle out, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
no, I like that so much. And yeah, the along with solar being contagious, I think your enthusiasm is contagious as well.
Thanks, Sam.
And
Appreciate
in
it.
person, but also just right on the page. And so it's really, really an inspiration to read, and great to have you on. We better stop now, or it's going to turn into a whole long thing. So, and geez, and I know you got a lot of other cool stuff lined up, a lot of other online events and stuff. So I'll plug some of those for everybody when I post this.
Thank you, Sam. Really, really appreciate it. It's such a pleasure being here. I love the work of this program and all the work that you're doing. So happy to join you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andreas Karelas. All right, well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll have more stuff for you next week, and in the meantime, be well.